Hello and welcome to this week's episode. We have Dr. Neeta, who is a co-founder of Global Grit Institute, a mental health training platform for leaders and professionals, co-founder of the Dharma Coaching Institute, training thousands to live their best lives, and world-renowned expert on grit and resilience. Dr. Neeta has helped thousands of people move past their heartbreaks, failures, and disappointments. A cosmetic dentist turned acclaimed transformational speaker and emotional health advocate. That sucked now what was sparked by her own life experience of overcoming multiple adversities, which include being orphaned at a young age, surviving an abusive marriage of domestic violence, and extensive loss. She's a powerhouse. It was awesome. It was so much fun, and she is such a lovely person to talk to and a shining light to so many of us. Let's get right into it. Welcome to this week's episode of The Dude Therapist. We have Neeta Bhushan, and I'm super excited because in life we have so many things coming our way, and we have to learn to adjust, pivot, and work through it. And Dr. Neeta is one of the top people in the world helping people learn how to have grit, how to deal with the suck of life, yet keep moving on and keep pushing forward and maybe being greater or even just a little bit better afterwards. So before we get into my questions and kind of me stealing the show, can you introduce yourself to the listeners so they can get a good feel of who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm Dr. Neeta Bhushan, and I am, wow, I'm a human of many forms. I'm three-time best-selling author. I'm a former dentist that sold her practice for more. I'm a mama. I'm a serial entrepreneur now. I've founded a couple of different organizations at the intersection of mental health, transformation, growth. And my utmost belief is to make sure that you have all of the tools in your emotional, mental tool belt to build your resiliency and rise after tough, sucky human moments. So thanks for having me.
That's amazing. And you have like EverCoach. Is that you and your husband?
Yes. So I'm an author at EverCoach. EverCoach is an educational platform for coaching education.
Wow. So that's education on everything. Is it
So it's continuing, yeah. So it's continuing education for coaches. And I'd like to actually say it's probably the premier organization for folks who are looking even to utilize coaching as a skill set.
mhm.
Because I think that in and of itself is such a power tool when, in life, in relationship, with your kids, in relation with, friends, colleagues, your boss, to have that skill set as a coach, it's,
Mhm.
often rare because when do we learn to like be a good active listener?
Yeah, it just, it's funny. My daughter is like 3.5. My son is 9 months old. He's not really listening, even though he's yummy and cute, but like he's not really paying attention that much. Um, but it's so interesting how we invest so much time in our kids' education on like
Hmm.
very specific, and I made up this new word, niche instead of niche or niche because it's such an argument, like a very
Oh, I
specific
like
niche,
that. Niche.
right? Like
Okay.
Target, niche. It's a little fancier. Let's elevate it a little bit,
Like Nick Lachey,
Nick Lachey,
circa
he's so good looking. Let's have a word
2000.
about him. Let's have a word about him. We all watch Love Is Blind, so let's just say it. Um,
So true. Let's just put it out there.
that we don't teach real human skills in school.
Yeah.
It's happening in the home. But like, what if you don't know that skill in your home? What if you're not educated in that, or you just are not aware? You learn it later on in life, and sometimes that can be a delay or even a disservice to you as a human. So it's so important that we learn this stuff. So let's back up for a second. You're a dentist, and you're like, you know
Yeah.
what? I hate having my hands in people's mouth. I don't understand what they're saying. No one likes dentists, even though you seem like a very nice person, and I'm sure you'd be wonderful to work with. What made that
I think
switch?
you'd be a really good patient. Yeah.
I don't talk a lot. Even though I talk a lot now, when I'm with a dentist, I'm very like, you do you. I
Okay.
got you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good.
What made the push? Like, what was that moment where you're like, you know what? I love what I do, or I don't love what I do, and I'm doing great or not doing great, but like, there's something more out there for me.
Yeah. So for me, I had a sucky moment a couple years before I decided that I was going to exit dentistry. And I had it was like it was a big awakening for me. And that big awakening was, leaving my first marriage. And so it was all the things. It was dark. I recognized that it was toxic. I recognized that it was unhealthy. I was unsafe. And I mean, things went down and it was not good. It was like December 31st. I mean, it was like all of the dramatics around it of recognizing that you're living in fear, like fear of the world, fear of being judged, fear of coming from a background where I came from. My dad, Indian, mom, Filipino. They came from those places. They also had a very unique marriage in many ways because it's multicultural, multi-religious household. So there were a lot of things, and not to mention, I mean, you're a therapist. I had a lot of losses growing up. And so I had to grow up early, and I lost my mom and my brother and my dad before I was 19. And so a lot of those things kind of, packaged up in many ways my own emotions that I was really suppressing for a whole decade, which I then channeled into unhealthy relationships. And so this kind of just came tumbling down in all of the ways. Now I call it, beautiful and chaotic and messy. But at the time it probably wasn't. It was far from that. But I think that was the initiation, the light bulb switch of, wow, I feel so brave to leave this situation, this marriage, to say no, even though everyone's like, wait, what are you doing with your life? To then say yes to me, which then turned on a cascade of probably the next, I want to say decade of living unapologetically, but also understanding my own walk with grief and my
Mm-hmm.
healing journey actually began at that time. And so that really then spearheaded me into, okay, well, what's next? And what's next? And it's kind of, I wrote this book, That Sucked, Now What? But this now what part kept coming up of like, okay, now what? Because of that, now what? Like, now what are you going to do? Now what are you going to do? So this whole idea of, yeah, dentistry is cute. And because I had all of these like survival tools to know what it takes to hustle in a business, create a business, because I had been doing that because I had to grow up, 10 years old as a caretaker for my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Those things in survival mode was like kind of second nature for me. Yet living on my own terms as like, what's my favorite color? I actually don't know.
Mm-hmm.
What do you like to do for fun? I actually don't know. And these were actual questions, when I was doing like personal growth 101, I couldn't even answer it. And that to me then started, on this like real rabbit hole of super self-discovery and investing in, in female-led startups. So it just took me to so many different places where then I said, okay, I'm going to say yes to myself and I'm going to sell this practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gave rise to, the next chapter for me.
Wow. And it's just so interesting that you come from it with such a perspective. And I think that a majority of our lives are this beautiful chaos. Some more than others, the ratio is more chaos to beautiful. And if you actually look at the research, David Kessler, who's one of the top grief counselors in the world, kind of challenged the classic grief. And he
Mm,
said, "It's okay. The 5 stages, okay, classic. Everyone knows about it. And the last one is
right.
acceptance." And he's like, "Okay, and then what? Okay, so I accepted that someone's gone or that my life is not what it was or what it can be. Okay, thank you. I accept it. And the last part he added, the sixth stage is hope, which is
Mm,
action, which is activity, which is progress, which is movement, which is forward, which is something that's not just passive, even though acceptance can be an active thing. But then you're
yeah,
left with the question of, okay, what do I do next? And that
right.
can be a very hard thing for a lot of people. And I took your bounce back quiz.
Ooh, okay. Who were you?
I had a lot of Kim Kardashians as my choice, but I
Isn't
ended
it
up
so
being.
fun, by the way?
It's so fun. I love it, and I kept it up here just so I can make sure I said. It says you're just like Queen Bee. I don't know what that means. Can you
Queen
talk
Bee,
about?
Beyonce.
Yeah, no, I know who Queen Bee is. I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I know what Queen Bee means in the
Like
real world.
what closet have you like where have you
No
been?
closet. I love Queen Bee.
Okay.
I love it. Huge fan. If you're listening, I'm here. But in the reality of it, can you talk about what bounce back is, and
Yeah.
if you can analyze me for a second, what Queen Bee means, for what that means for people
Ooh.
who don't know the quiz and what the other options are. I'm a little scared to ask, but go for it. Have fun with me. Go for it.
I'm excited. Oh, I'm excited. Well, so your bounce factor and it's how well you can bounce back from tough times. And so, yeah, the quiz that we created, it's fun because when we're thinking about our bounce factor or the components of building resiliency, we think we have to be tough. We have to, own our like everything and we've got to be like the alpha.
Mm-hmm.
And, from all of the things that I've been through, I probably would have been just like that too, like thinking, yeah, I have to be tough all the time because that was the definition of resilience when I was going through those tough times, losing, my mom to her cancer journey, then my brother a year after that. And so my dad during that time as like a single dad, Indian dad of like, Neeta, you're strong. You're strong. You're strong. You're strong. This is how you're resilient. This is what grit looks like, right? So these terms would get thrown at me as a teenager
Mm-hmm.
because of all of the things that I had gone through. And at one point I was working, 3 jobs as a teenager. So, it was kind of that to then say, okay, actually, no, because a decade later, I basically broke and shattered into a million pieces to
Mm-hmm.
only, uh, bring myself up again. And so the bounce factor is 4 parts. Okay. So first you have your upbringing. And then you have and I'll get to what these mean in a second, but your upbringing, which is how were you? How were you raised in your household? Were you taught that it was okay to raise your voice, speak your mind, say your truth, say what's on your mind, encourage dialogue? Like for some cultures, for myself, that was not encouraged. In fact, it was, you get more praise if it's like, yes, yes, yes. Like it just wasn't. And especially if there's like gender roles that your family is like more apt to listen to the boys in the house versus the girls in the house. So your upbringing in so many different ways comprises your ability to bounce back. And so this also, takes into account, did you grow up with loss? Did you grow up seeing hardship, adversity, setbacks? Or were you, did you have helicopter parents where, they're calling the school saying, you know what, he's not going to be able to turn in his homework this week, next week, or next month because he's just had, the flu. Um, and that happens. And we kind of see some of that even now in our generation. I don't know about you with your friends, but I see some of my friends with their kids who are a little bit older than my kids. I'm like, oh, okay. Okay, cool. You're doing that. And I would do something different just because I'm like queen of resilience and grit. Um, and this is a constant debate in our house too, by the way, with my husband, because he grew up in like super hard knocks in India where there's everything going around. And so context, right? Where did you grow up? Like, were you growing up in a city of like 8 million people? And that's a small town in India versus um, versus a small town in Texas of like 500 people. So that's upbringing. That's number one. Number two, you have your exposure to good stress. So are you open to your exposure to good stress? Are you open to having that difficult conversation, saying what's on your mind without feeling like the rejection or feeling that you'll be judged? So that's your exposure to good stress. How often are you, doing 10 burpees in the middle of the day? That's an example of like a physical good stress, right? And then the last two is your emotional capacity to feel. So are you able to feel the feels, or do you actually shove it under a rug? Do you avoid your feelings? Do you just say, you know what, I'm good, I'm all right, like this is great, this is fine, this doesn't phase me, right? Or are you on the other end of the spectrum? Does it take you out if if you get reprimanded by somebody you love, uh, or something doesn't go your way, or that pitch that you said to your colleague or a boss for a raise went south or sour, and now you're like Netflix and like binging on ice cream for the whole week. How are you actually feeling the feels, but then taking action? And then finally, the fourth is your self-awareness. So are you noticing these things, or are you, again, just looking the other way, or not paying attention and not taking that personal responsibility yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And so you rated yourself as a queen bee. So queen bee, she's got it all together. She's got a little bit. Her bounce factor is intact. Yet because she's like, super queen, a lot of times she's handling a lot of things, and she does not give herself the grace to pause and to perhaps take the time that she needs without running into burnout. So,
So thank you for summing up my entire life in woo, it's so true. So true. And I wrote down a few notes because I love what you said. There's something interesting. When I first started grad school as a therapist,
mm,
resilience was something that was always talked about when it came to oppressive situations.
mm,
Being resilient is not the ideal. Like, it's not fun to be like, well, I'm resilient because I went through chaos. It's not like, oh, but look
yeah,
at the silver lining. You're resilient now. That wasn't a fun place to go through. It is great that you have resilience. And I think that a lot of us have the ability to be resilient more than we think. And I use this really stupid example, but I remember when I was first started college, I did Insanity, the workout Insanity with Sean
oh
T.
yeah, oh yeah, oh
I did
it's
two
hard.
rounds of it with a roommate of mine. Vomited the first
Oof.
month every day, and I finished. And I could barely walk like the first month. I was walking like a penguin. My legs were burning. I was so much pain. And I finished, and I taught myself that I can get through it by keep doing it. That's resilience. It's not
Mm,
the scary monster resilience that we have to go through chaos to be tough or to be a fighter. But resilience looks different to each person. And in the mental health world, it's not the ideal that we want someone to be resilient. We hope that you don't have to be, but if you are, good for you. You're fighting. And you talk about resilience of this idea, and I love you said good stress. I love that you said that because I
yeah.
think we're afraid of that word, stress.
And I think we try to avoid it at all costs. And I'm like, well, actually, good stress is what will take you into not being ashamed if you suck at it. Not being ashamed if it doesn't go your way, not feeling guilty for not living up to whatever set expectations you secretly had and it didn't go through. It just normalizes that we're all human, and that's okay. And maybe you got a little bit of bravery out of it at an end result. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that there's this metaphor that I use quite a bit, right? And I kind of shared that back in the day, I I was taught to be this, tough as glass. But if you take a glass of water, you let it go, that's going to shatter into a million pieces. But if you take like a basketball or a ball or any of those little tiny balls that come into if you go to one of those game places with your kids and it comes through the little,
Yeah.
the coin machine. Yeah. And that bounces and it has the agility and it has that softness yet toughness. So there is the duality of both that can coexist all at the same time. And I think it's, like addressing, and like you just said, you're acknowledging it. Yeah, that really sucked. wish you didn't have to go through that. And on the other end of it, that resiliency could be that bounciness, the
Mm-hmm.
playfulness, the fun as well, where if something didn't go your way, you can kind of also like laugh it off and say, oh my God, yeah, I did that thing again and it didn't work, but oh well, I'm going to be okay, right? I think most people, they take it upon themselves to make it their identity that
Mm-hmm.
whatever failure or thing that didn't work or setback or challenge, then that is like the end of them. And so resiliency can also look like making fun of yourself. Um,
I'm very good
and
at that, by the way. But like also,
you're resilient, by the way.
but no, thank you. But the funny thing that happens sometimes that when people identify themselves so much to their failures, they cannot be successful because they're so trapped in this loop of destructive thinking of I am whatever that failure is. And I love that metaphor of the idea of being soft and bouncy because that's how we have to be, right? We have to have that little, give, but also be strong. Because I think people think of resilience as you went through a hard thing, you must be tough, like a rock or
Right,
something, or granite or a diamond, whatever hard thing you can think of in your brain. That's the
right.
epitome of human nature. And it's not, because then you don't have vulnerability, you don't have relationships, and you don't have a lot of good things that come with some give and some leeway. And just to touch on the good stress, when I'm an anxiety specialist, and some of the things I work a lot with
Yes.
people who have anxiety is the idea that some anxieties are really healthy to have. So like if you're in a forest and there's a freaking bear, you better be damn worried because it's a bear. But like if you're sitting in your house and there's no bear, why are you afraid of the bear? Because that's not good stress. That's not a healthy timing of stress. Stress is natural when something is serious or
Mhm.
intense or scary or worrisome. When, paying your bills can be stressful, or things like your kids. I mean, if you have kids, it is stressful. The nature of getting kids out the door and to bed at night is a hectic, chaotic situation. Some
Yeah.
days more than others, right? You never know, depending on how old your kids or how amazing your kids are, or how much you actually care. But it's good stress. It's natural stress. It's not the end of the world stress where I need to drop everything and go, that's it, it's over. And there are times where
Yeah.
that happens, but good stress is natural. And when we learn the distinction, and sometimes, like you said before about where we grew up, how we grew up, we don't know the
Hmm.
difference. We've been conditioned to not know the difference.
Well, yeah, because it's hardwired in ourselves to think, oh wow, like every time I do this, or every time I take, this leap or this unknown, that's going to be, this is a trigger warning, or this is like my survival has to kick in,
Mm-hmm.
where it actually could look a little different. I mean, good stress can also be just exposing yourself to, I don't know, a cold shower for 10 seconds in the morning. That's an example of good stress. Good stress can also be maybe paying for the person behind you, at Starbucks for their coffee. That's good stress, especially if you're navigating like financial boundaries of being able to, expand yourself and spend on other people.
Mm-hmm.
That can be example of paying it forward. Another example of good stress could be having that difficult conversation that you've been putting off because normally you're a person that does not like conflict or confrontation, so you're not going to ever say anything. You're not going to poke the bear, if you will. But that's a sign of good stress because you are willing to be uncomfortable in that situation. And that actually is okay because after that conversation, like you were just saying, that gives you vulnerability. If that goes well or not well, at least you're speaking your truth to somebody, and it's up to them if they're, in whatever way they take it. But the uncertainty of how they're going to take it, that's the magic. That's the
Mm-hmm.
juice that most of us are so afraid. So we minimize and we forget or we shun or we shove it under a rug because we don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah, and I wanna have a lot of ideas and things we're gonna talk about for the rest of the time. But that idea you just said, there's a great therapist. His name is Dr. David Burns. Has a book called Feel Good Therapy and Note When Panic Attacks, um, and he has this really great metaphor about rugs. How if
Oh
you
yeah.
look at anxiety or you look at panic attacks, It's usually
Mm-hmm.
when it's not triggered by anything specific, like X equals Y. It's just random. You're just
Yeah.
sitting and all of a sudden overwhelmed, body reaction, brain reaction, you're feeling your numbingness, all the things you feel like you're dying, but you're not dying, the classic panic attack symptoms.
Yeah.
It comes from the idea that you've been taking things and hiding under the rug and never opening it or looking. It's like that the
Mm.
closet that we never want to admit we have, that we shove everything that we don't want to see, and that you never want anyone to open it. And when someone does, everything falls out on you. And to
Oh,
me,
yeah.
that's what I do sometimes as a therapist, and I'm sure you do as a coach. And I'm a huge fan of coaches. We're going to talk about that in a second, about people who are
Mm-hmm.
anti-coaches. Don't worry, I'm sure we're going to be very kind. I promise. By we, I mean me. There's no one else here. I don't know why I said we, but the idea of capacity to feel is something
Mm.
that we're very afraid of. I was always taught as a kid, feelings matter. So I was always the one who expressed feelings, talked about feelings. I was that kid in the recess that was sitting and listening to kids talk, and just like that's always
Wow.
who I've been. But I work with people every day that have been taught and conditioned to not feel, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
touch the rug. They don't open the closet. And my job is to help someone open the closet. Just to look at
Mm.
first, take out this piece of clothes and say, you know what? I'm going to throw that. I'm going to burn that. I'm going to put that here. I'm going to organize it. I'm going to do this and that. How do you help someone? What are some of the things that you have learned or that you educate or teach or for yourself to create that capacity to feel? What are some of the things that
Mm.
you think are really important for people to hear about that?
Yeah, so I think that, for your emotional capacity, that I think, I mean, it's so similar to what you've said around we have to take stock in what our patterns have been in the past. And if our patterns, and obviously that's where kind of like the upbringing comes up, because like you said, if most of your clients, if their worldview was like, nope, we only have to be happy, or I was told growing up, big girls don't cry, big boys don't cry. Like my little brother was told, big boys don't cry. So, you know, you can be a tough little girl. So for me, it was like, okay, to get validation from my caretakers who love me, then it's not safe to express emotion. And so, first, it's making peace with, well, what was the story of how your feelings were met? Were they acknowledged? Were they welcomed in your house? How was that? That's number one. You can, do a little deep dive in it. You can start journaling on it, but that would be like the first exercise to do a little self reflection to say, how were feelings met? Did you have any of, some of the things that I just shared? Like, how was it growing up for you? What were feelings? Because for you, it seems like, feelings matter. And that was kind of a dialogue in your household. For me, that was not the case. I would probably be one of your clients
Well,
as
the funny
well
thing
to
is, it was
unpack
only
that.
from one parent.
Wow.
My
But
mom
see,
was like
even
that, and my
that's crazy.
dad, who is
Mm,
extremely feeling, that I've learned more about him over the years, um, that he is a depth like a
mm,
well of emotions, but never talks about it.
mm,
So you don't know what he feels. I said something recently. We moved from New York to Vegas 6 months ago, and
yeah.
that was the third time I've seen him cry in my life.
Oh, wow.
Right? So
Wow.
grown man, almost 70 years old, crying because his grandkids are not going to be around. It's a very
Mm,
emotional thing. And when I think about it, it brings up so much emotion of sadness and pain and joy that he loves us so
yeah.
much. But my brother does not express. I do. Right? So it's so funny how there's two kids, two adults, right? Two not we're
Right.
both all adults now, but two parents, how much an impact of your upbringing is. And it doesn't mean, and
Mm,
I want to make this very clear, I'm not a fan of like psychoanalytics of diving into every dream you've had and the best experience and the worst experience when you were 3 and who you wanted to sleep with when you were 4 years old as a boy or a girl. Doesn't matter. Thank you, Freud, for your service, but we're past that now. But I do believe that our childhood can very
mm,
much dictate how we label and think about the world and perceive
sure.
ourselves and the external life. And we're not trapped in that. And I'm
Right.
sure you see it all the time in your work, right? With the grit and the bouncing back and all the work that you do. How do you help someone see that world? Right? You went from a destructive, toxic environment for yourself that was
Yeah.
unsafe. and you pushed past that and made a decision. Can you
Mm-hmm.
talk about how you make a decision to not be trapped in a mindset or even an experience and that holds like a grip on you? How do you do that?
Well, I think it just starts out with what is going to be your anchor, and it goes back to even how do you reconcile your emotional capacity? Because if for most of us, and probably most people who are tuning into your podcast, they're trying to figure out like how can I change this narrative that I have, or the story that I have. So the first is, well, let's make peace with what were the stories, or what did you grow up with? That's number one. And number two, how can you actually give yourself permission to embrace the suck? And in my book, That Suck Now What, I mean, I have two different emotional release practices that I share. And one of them is basically just a simple act of putting your hand over your heart and fight, flight, or freeze. If there is a bear, and if you're constantly thinking there's a bear outside, you are going to fight, flight, freeze, and you're going to react. But if we are able to calm our nervous system just by with the intention of putting your hand over your heart and saying, okay, I got this. I got this. And just that physical sensation of somebody holding their chest, you can try it right now, that regulates your emotional nervous system, that regulates yourself to actually pause, that we don't have to react. It's you catching yourself, because a lot of times, we're up here in our heads, we're thinking, we're, analyzing, we're doing all of these things, but let's bring it back into the body as well. And if we are actually holding ourselves, that's just starting to calm ourselves down into the next phase, which is, all right, let's regulate our breathing. Like, what are we noticing? Are we noticing that we are breathing or not, or
Mm-hmm.
shallow breathing? Like, can we, and I'm not trying to say let's go into yoga right now, because a lot of times when we are frustrated, that's probably the last thing that we want to do. But can you simply act and notice, is there tension anywhere?
Mm-hmm.
And paying attention, because those are the first steps. It just didn't come overnight that I was going to fully shift and change. It was noticing the small things, because some of you might think, well, wow, she's changed her life around. How could I actually do that? It's in these small, different, brave acts for yourself to start giving yourself space and a window to say, oh yeah, that was my pattern in these relationships. That was actually my pattern in my friendships. Actually, that was my pattern, with in my with my colleagues at work. So then we can start to choose to unlearn. Well, are there examples of people that you do want to be like? And for myself, it was, yeah, I wanted to be like like, I grew up in Chicago, so I wanted to be like Oprah,
So do
many
I.
years. And I would watch, yeah, I mean, growing up with, Harpo Studios right around the corner, and that would be my reprieve. And
Mm-hmm.
so to have and even enlist expanders, which are people that, live the dream, and they're doing what you want to do, start. And nowadays we have like podcasts and so many things, and YouTube channels and things like that. Way back when I was growing up, it was just TV. So you watched like Barbara Walters 2020 on a Friday night, Oprah. And that was like my thing every day. And so even the way she spoke, the way she was interviewing people, I'm literally getting chills right now, because it's like, oh my gosh, it's so true. That's exactly what I was doing. But to start believing it, even when you're thinking that, okay, that's not really my reality, because then it becomes slowly your reality with, of course, the books that you're doing. But it first comes up if you are giving yourself the space. And it could be as small as 5 minutes a day, where you're doing, and I call this, and I share this in the book, but it's called a POC, a personal observation check-in. Personal observation check-in is just you giving yourself, okay, what worked well in this scenario? What did I do well? What could I have done better? And how am I feeling in this moment? because most of the time we don't even want to feel or say our feelings because we should be feeling something else.
Mm-hmm.
Because I should be happy that I got this opportunity, but I'm not happy with how it went. But we deny our feelings entirely because we're like, no, we should be grateful for that because that was an intro that I got from somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, just say like, God, I feel awful that I may have blown this opportunity or whatever the feelings are and not judge it because the
Mm-hmm.
feelings are not you, right? And you know this probably more than anyone else as a feelings guy. But I think it's such a great reminder that so many of us, we fail, we don't do.
Yeah. And I think you're talking about something interesting with curiosity, or being aware, is one of the biggest combatant that we can do for ourselves. I remember when I actually had a massive panic attack when my daughter was born, about 2 months or 3 months, 2 months into her life. I just wasn't dealing with all the stuff. I had postpartum anxiety as a man, which is a very
Yeah.
big thing, happens often. Um,
Yep.
and I thought I was dying, right? My face was numb. I was like, could not think, could not, it was just overwhelming. And I was in the ambulance. And the EMT said to me, he goes, dude, I need you to slow your breathing. I'm like, I am breathing slowly. He's like, no, you're not. A normal breath rate is 15 times per minute. You're at 35. I
Oh.
need you to slow your breathing down. You're not aware about how fast you're breathing. I was not aware. I wasn't paying attention. I was just over, 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 which was causing a huge response cycle in my system to survive.
Mm-hmm.
I was signaling it that I was in danger when I wasn't.
Mm.
So sometimes just curiosity and awareness could be the distinction between healthy life, mental health, physical health, your soul, your spirit, whatever you believe in, could be that world. And we have to wrap up in a little bit because you're a very busy person with a lot of busy things to do, and it's so amazing. I got one more question about something you said, and then I want to open the floor to something I ask all my guests. But you talk about an anchor. You
Mm-hmm.
said that twice already. What does that mean for someone who doesn't know what an
Yeah.
anchor is for themselves?
Oh, yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up because I think it's so important. So, an anchor would be something that brings you back to the moment of what you are trying to, let's just say, become. For this example, we want to, you know, change our reality for the better. We want to change the way we think about something, or maybe that, we want to do more of X in our life. We want a more good stress in our life. Well, an anchor would be, it could be a mantra, it could be a saying. The anchor that I use a lot with tough moments or how to come through and rise after tough moments is that sucked. Now what? Okay, so that sucked. Your boss gave the promotion to somebody else. Now what? That sucked. And it's not to say that I'm bypassing or we're bypassing the severity of the issue. It's just to say, okay, that sucked. To actually remember to acknowledge, all right, you just went through this. You just had this hard conversation. You just didn't sleep for 3 days because baby was sick. But all right, I feel you, I got you. And now what? Well, now what? Are you going to take some time for yourself? Are you going to take a moment to pause? Are you going to take a moment to maybe just lay low for a little bit? So the now what is the action step, but the in between is so in between the that sucked and the now what is the vulnerability piece. It's the vulnerability piece to acknowledge the suckiness of the moment. And so that's an example of, what I would call an anchor. How is that reminding you to either ground yourself when you are feeling ungrounded after something, big has happened, big or small, could be even getting cut off in traffic. All right, that sucked. Now what? That sucked. I'm not going to go and beat my horn and chase after this person that cut me off. Now what? Now what? Okay, I'm gonna breathe, and it's gonna be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, example of an anchor.
Yeah, I love that. And the last question that I'll ask is for anyone who hasn't listened to anything we said or doesn't know a lot about some of your stuff, what would be about 2 to 3 things you would love for them to know going out of this interview, out of this conversation, to maybe get them more interested in things you have to say, or even a good takeaway or golden nugget that you have on your mind?
Yeah, I think that, I love this conversation, by the way. And for anybody that is, super curious at, changing that lens for you after sucky moments to embrace the duality of how two paradoxical or opposite emotions can exist. We talk about all of that on the Brave Table, but I think the big, discovery piece for you is, well, can you shift your perspective? And, if that's a yes, then, I think you're on the right journey. And
I love that.
perspective is everything.
I love that. Dr. Neetha, thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate your time, all that you're doing. Like I said to you before we recorded, I love the hat game also. Um, I tried getting into Kangles. My head does not fit into them. Samuel L. Jackson,
Oh
LL
my
Cool
God.
J. I'm so sorry to
So
disappoint
good.
you. So sorry to disappoint you guys.
So good.
I tried. I tried. It's too much hat for my head. But really appreciate everything you're doing. I hope we're recording right now before Thanksgiving. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving, and I'm super excited about your book. So if you're listening at this point, stay tuned to a giveaway for Dr. Neetha's book because I can't wait to buy it for someone.
Oh,
So
thank you so
thank you so
much,
much for
Bev.
being on the show.
It was such a great conversation. Thank you for having me.